Hi, and welcome to 2 Pints of Maggots and a Packet of Hooks, the fishing podcast. It's series 2. And for the last several weeks, we've had a little rest. We've regained our thoughts and we've come back with a vengeance. It's been a tricky old spring, I have to say, since the last time we did a podcast. The weather's been crazy. We had a very, very dry April and then a really, really wet May, and it's affected the fishing in general. We're starting to see weights on the match fishing scene pick up now, which is good and positive. We're getting lots of full bags of fish, and on the specimen scene, one or two of the better fish are starting to show as well. But of course, the fish, they don't know what's going on. Low pressure, high pressure, the odd frost overnight as well. So it's been a little bit tricky on the fishing front. But the good news is, in terms of the podcasting front, we have got an action-packed lineup once again. What I would say, though, is we're going to do things slightly different for Series 2, in the respect that during Series 1, I tried to stick to a timeline of releasing a new episode every fortnight or so. Because everybody's back out now fishing, everybody's busy again, restrictions are being lifted, and there's a hint of summer in the air as well. It's that getting the guests together and to do an episode every fortnight is really, really tricky. Everybody's got lots on. Of course, we've got summer holidays kicking in as well, makes it even more difficult. So we're going to do these episodes on an ad hoc basis. We could have 2 weeks between episodes. We could have 2 months. Who knows? It all depends on our special guests. And of course, I'm up against big competition. The Guru podcast has been getting non-Guru sponsored anglers on there as well. So there's a lot of interest, many, many thousands of listens that those guys are getting. And of course, I can't compete with that. There's just little old me and my microphone and my questions. But the good news is, on episode 1 of series 2, we've brought back the fantastic Keith Arthur for the big chat in the big chair. And what we'll do is we'll focus away from the past, present and future that we covered in episode 2 and talk a little bit more about anecdotes around fishing, some classic matches that he's fished, some classic characters, and focus on that way a little bit more. Keith, as it stands now, Keith's show, episode 1 of series 1, is still the most listened to podcast that we've put together. So it makes sense to bring him back and kick off the new series. He was so popular that I think it's a good way to start in our new series 2. So let's begin with the press pack. Okay, so here we are with the press pack, a chance to look through the weekly and monthly media for anything that's caught my eye or been interesting. And on this episode, we're going to concentrate more on the Bauer Media publication. So that's Angling Times, Improve Your Course Fishing, because there's lots and lots to catch up on since we last did a podcast. Just focusing though on the most recent content, a couple of things that caught my eye in terms of fish catches. The first one, and as everybody knows that's been listening to these podcasts, is tench. By far is my number one fish, my favourite species by far. So this chap called Max Palmer had a 111 pound haul of tench in just 4.5 hours fishing his southern club water. So that stood out like a sore thumb. And I'll just read you what it says here, that the Devon angler targeted the island pond on the Racker Hayes complex near Newton Abbot. He landed 25 fish, which all fell to casters, presented 6 metres from the bank. He says he was a very happy man. I'm amazed that such a small water produced such a great haul. Kept things simple, targeting 7 foot of water, a few sections out, and simply loose feeding casters, fishing double caster on a size 16, and it was pretty much a bite every drop in. So brilliant. And it's a picture there, 2 sort of waistlings full of tench. Just a great, great sight. I can't think the last time I had anything anywhere near that sort of catch, probably a dozen or so a couple of years ago, but no, brilliant. So well done to Max just there. Other fish catches that caught my eye. There was one in the recent Angling Times that, blew my mind really. It was from a guy called Joe Miller. And he'd gone to target a local gravel pit in Kent. It's an unnamed venue. I'm not surprised when you look at this haul that he's had. Now, he's fished specimen tactics, if you like. He's spotted some bait in and he's fished overnight. But not only has it produced 3 personal best weights, but also just a phenomenal amount of fish. He's had sort of a dozen or so eels. He's had over 20 tench. He's had numerous carp, but they were all sort of stood out with their personal best fish. So first of all, his personal best tench went £8.13 ounce. Personal best carp, he's got a mirror there at £35.8 and a PB eel at £7 1 ounce, which is an absolute right old snake. If you see the pictures it's in this week's Angling Times. And the bait that he fished for all these, maggot. And it just goes to show how important maggot is still as a bait for match fishing. Pleasure anglers, of course, it can catch anything. And in this instance, for a specimen angler targeting specifically big fish, he's put in a load of deads and some lives as well, and just fished a bunch of maggots over the top throughout the day and night and had this wonderful haul of fish. So good on Joe. Fair play to him. Brilliant net of fish. Next thing that caught my eye is an article in last week's Angling Times, which said the changing face of commercials. And what this article essentially, I found it really interesting because it's the way that some of these fishery owners have decided to change tack and move down a different route. As fish have grown bigger in their commercials, they're actually moving away from matches or reducing matches to attract a different type of angler. So the first one that was quoted in there was viaduct fisheries down in the southwest. And what they've done is now moved away from lots of matches and competitions, no qualifiers on there anymore. And they've moved towards a more pleasure angler and a holiday theme. So there's lodges on there now as well. They're thinking about bars, bigger tackle shops, etc., etc. And the idea is that they just don't want the hassle of running matches anymore. Fish welfare in some respects as well. And I just thought that's quite interesting. And I know that some of the fish run really big in viaduct, and they're actually making a conscious effort now to discourage match fishing. They're just using one water for matches and the rest for pleasure fishing. The owner basically says that at his age now, he doesn't need the hassle and it's time to have a more laid back approach. So that was interesting. Similarly with Gold Valley. So I've fished Gold Valley a few times. I've never been to viaducts, but Gold Valley, I always thought a really, really pretty venue. The Syndicate Lake at the back, even the funky little bat pool, Middle Lake, the gold one, which is overlooked by the lodge there. Lovely willow trees, very established. And the challenge that I think John Raisin's saying in this article is that the fish are just getting too big. There's numerous carp now that are pushing £20. They've cancelled all club matches because they don't want club anglers weighing in the fish with perhaps putting them at risk, dragging them up the bank and whatnot. And it's a difficult one. So they've gone from 5 matches a week, all club matches cancelled, down to just opens 2 a week, one in midweek and one on a Saturday. And what he's seeing is that attendances are up. So rather than having little itty bitty matches through the week, which, probably a bit of a hassle running, it's better to have 2 stellar opens midweek and weekend, and they're regulated more in terms of the weighing in. So that's Gold Valley's perspective. On the flip side, from my old stomping ground in terms of partridge, so Barbara's put a few words in there with regards to they've missed matches. They know how difficult it is to run them. They have a number of matches every week and they are very, very well attended with, averages 60, 70 anglers plus most days. But she wants to try and find a balance and have sort of 50% of the complex open for pleasure fishing, 50% for the matches. And that works well where the coveys in general, the covey snake lakes tend to be for matches only anyway. I noticed that she has released a couple of the coveys for pleasure fishing through lockdown. But yeah, despite them being really tough, they miss the banter. There's a lot more very competitive there as well. So yeah, that's slightly on the flip side. She gets where the other guys are coming from, but for them, and especially for the revenue, matches are very, very important for those types of waters. So yeah, the changing face of commercials I thought was quite good. Okay, moving on to the next article, which is Arthur's Archive. Of course, Keith Arthur, our special guest on this episode, creating part 2, I guess, of our big chat following on from the one we did in series 1. And in this one, it's really interesting because it ties things up quite nicely. In series 1, episode 1 and 2 with Keith and Tom, we spoke about Daiwa, the relationship that they both had with them. So, of course, Tom was a consultant. Keith was a rep. But this article that Keith writes, it says the headline is Tommy Pickering signs for Daiwa in 1989. And they speak about the range of rods that we discussed on this podcast, the connoisseur range, which they both believe, you could put new eyes on them, new rings, and they'd still sell because they were so iconic. But what Keith does do is name checks, makes it even more interesting for me, is that he name checks a Japanese chap who was a master rod engineer, really. And his name is Nobuo Nodera. And just to quote what he puts here, he says, it wasn't all Tom's work creating these great ranges of rods. He was blessed with having the opportunity to working with arguably the best rod engineer ever. Also, Roy Marlowe was a professional consultant, but not only for rods, and was able to translate Tom's ideas and thoughts into a technical language that Nobuo could understand. I still have 2 TP rods in my bag. They're my go-to tools, which is a 13-foot connoisseur waggler and a connoisseur Z11 13-foot feeder rod. And we spoke about that. It's amazing. We discussed it on episode 1 and 2 with both Tom and Keith. And to see it in print, talking about that range and the guy that was the engineer behind him is really, really fascinating for me. Another article which caught my mind is, I've discussed on these podcasts, I'm a lover of bait. Ever since I was a small boy, mixing up ground baits, knocking things together to try and, attract and hold fish was a really interesting thing for me as a kid. I spent hours in the supermarket buying dyes, different brand flake, getting some hemp seed from a local pet shop, cooking it up and crushing it down, and, brown crumb, crushing up biscuits in a blender, all sorts of stuff I did as a kid. And what fascinated me was Dr. Paul Garner does a regular column in Angling Times, the bait clinic it's called. And then this one, it stood out straight, how to create the perfect ground bait mix. So I thought, aye, let's have a read of this and see if it's interesting. And it really is. And one of the things when it comes to ground bait, over the years, and I always use, if a venue allows it, I will use ground bait without doubt. In every single instance, without a question. I think it does give an edge. But one of the things I think is ignored by a lot of people is the colour choice. And Dr. Paul Garner talks about this. In fact, his article starts off with colour choice, black, brown, red, green, and white. And he gives an overview of each one and what in each instance. Now, I did a couple of posts not long ago, concentrating on a colour chart. When you read and delve in a little bit more about how colours act and work under the surface, and it's a question that I discussed with Rob Hughes on episode 3 in series 1, around what can you see underwater? What do we believe fish can and can't see? And that's where these colours come in. And I come across what's called the colour complementary chart. And it talks about what colours complement each other from a primary perspective and how it may look under the water. So, for example, if a water was very, very green coloured, so there's a lot of algae in there, perhaps a fisher had put some dye in or something like that, then red is the complementary colour, or is the primary colour that complements green, should I say. So a red ground bait perhaps could work really, really well. If, for example, the water had a sort of a darker green bordering on a blue, I know some fisheries are a little bit strange, then something like an orangey brown would work quite well. So he talks very similar in this, black being ideal for laying down a bed in clear water, which, we all tend to gravitate towards a black bait in wintertime when the water's clear. It makes sense. Fish don't want to go over a light coloured bottom where there's predators specifically as well. Red, very popular for bream, tench. You can't go tench fishing without fishing with a red bait, and certainly with worms as well. Green, very visible underwater. It appears quite bright, brilliant for a method feeder to draw fish in. White, he uses for spodding, making a cloud. Again, a little bit in winter. And then he goes on to talk about additives such as hemp, sugar, krill, and salt. So krill, crustacean extracts combine perfectly with pellet-based ground baits. All coarse fish love the taste of this small shrimp-like creature. It can be particularly effective for tench incursions. 10% of krill to your ground bait is the perfect mix. So lots and lots of little tips and tricks in there with regards to creating a perfect ground bait mix. But I guess from my perspective, what I pulled out of it and what, hopefully you guys can get out of it as well, is think about the colour chart. Think about what primary colours are complemented by others when it comes to dictating your mix for the day. And I know it's a little bit bit of a strange one because you think, I'm fishing X venue this weekend. I always use the same mix, or we know that this mix works well, and that's absolutely fine. But actually, what if the colour of the waters has changed significantly? Perhaps a different colour ground bait could work well. So you don't need to be taking 10 bags to every session that you go on, but it's just worth considering. Okay, moving on to Improve Your Course Fishing magazine. It's the latest edition for June. It is edition 377. And one of the articles that stood out the most, there's all sorts in it, as always, which is great. But the one that stood out the most was one with Des Ship's monthly article that he does. But this one resonates because it's preventing line bites and foul hooking. We're now at the time when the fish are beginning to really sort of have a chew. They're starting to spawn a little bit now as well. So once that's over and done with, they'll look to sort of build up strength once again. And we're looking at margin fishing, etc. It's the time when I start thinking about fishing paste, things like that. But it's always, remember, we all get giddy. You start lashing in big cups of ground bait or loose feed down the edge, thinking that the fish are going to start getting the tails up straight away, and it's not the case. These fish are now, especially on commercials, are becoming very, very wary. You'll get line bites to death, and you'll start foul looking fish, and one or two fish that shoot off out of your margin or out of your main line of attack, you can spoil the swim. So it's worth reminding ourselves some of these tips. And the way that I like Improve Your Course Fishing does it is, we all think, match anglers, we all think we know it, but it's absolutely not the case. So they break it down into 2 sets of 5 steps. So step 1, try shallower. If you're fishing tight to an island and suddenly start foul looking fish after a run of hooking them properly, there's every chance the shoal has come off the deck. Fish will be brushing against your rig and you'll be lifting into them when you strike. So try shallower. Thinks it sounds simple enough, but how many of us actually do it? Instead, we often throw the rig up the bank and think they're not having it properly. Number 2, find the winning depth. If you're fishing the margins, it's important to find a depth where the fish will just about settle. That means that they'll come in and feed, but still have a little bit of caution and not charge around trying to compete. 18 inches, definitely the best. Okay. Number 3, bulk it. Now we know this one. Anchoring your hook bait to the bottom will make it harder for the fish to waft it off the deck. Bulk your shot and place it on top of the hook length, not much less chance your hook bait will be stirred up, landing into a fish's tail or fin. Number 5, fish off your feed. You've often got to give plenty of bait to get these fish into the margins, but once they arrive, large carpets can create issues. The shoal will have lots to see, dart around and cause chaos. If you fish in the middle of that pile, line bites are inevitable. Instead, place your rig 2 to 3 feet away from the main bed of bait. You'll find you'll still get bites picking off those fish that are on the periphery and slightly cage you. Good point. We talk about setting a trap, which is another way of doing it. Rather than filling in big pots, just use your toss pot, and fish pinpoint over that toss pot. So there's only one mouthful for the fish to come and grab, and your hook bait will be sat on it. But if we have got giddy and started putting in big pots, this could be the way forward as well. Fish off of it and pick off the fish on the edge of the shoal. He then moves into his next set of 5 points in terms of the bait. So number 1, make it stand out, something like a piece of worm or a cube of meat over a bed of smaller pellets. Paste has become a forgotten art on commercials, but if you're looking to prevent foul hooking, fish paste. I do it all the time in summer. More often than not, I'll fish paste down the edge rather than anything individual, because I know every time you strike, miss a bite, you're feeding your peg. But similar, the bites tend to be way, way more positive. It's standing out. It's a nice big target for the fish to home in on, and they just suck it up without even thinking. Whereas some of those more traditional bunches of maggots or a hard pellet or, a soft pellet can be a little bit obvious. Number 3, try a smaller hook bait. If fish are suspicious around a certain type of bait, they'll be erratic and lead to line bites. If you're using a 6mm bandy pellet, try a 4, etc. Number 4, rely on heavy baits. Carp love baits such as maggots and micropellets, but they are lightweight and can waft off the bottom. Switching to hemp, corn, bigger pellets such as 8mm. They'll be heavy and stay on the deck. Good point. I've never fed 8mm down the edge. Might be worth a try. Never thought about it. And last but not least, number 5, make your ground bait heavy. Now, I think we're all onto this and it's the way forward, but ground bait's full of attraction, great for down the edge, but like micros and maggots, can be lifted off the bottom. So make it heavy and sticky. Once it's been whipped together and riddled, you can add a big pole cup of water and make it a little stiffer and heavier again. So yeah, it's like almost putting it down a ground bait pate, if you like, where it's going to go bump straight on the bottom and then break down slowly rather than putting it in light and loose. So yeah, margin fishing, it's that time of the year, and just some nice tips there from Des Ship, just to remind us of approaching them, because we've been waiting for this, haven't we, for months and months with all the rubbish weather. As soon as we start seeing tails now down the edge, I've seen it on the club matches that I've been fishing, and people are lashing in big pots or handfuls of bait, and it's not the way to go now. I'm not so sure. So yeah, good stuff in the Bauer stuff. So Angling Time, some interesting articles and some nice little tips from Des Ship there as well. So there's a few bits and pieces that caught my eye in the press pack.
Teddy Fisher Baits specialise in the manufacture of fishing ground bait and additives. We combine a 40-year-old proven fish catching recipe and the experience of our skilled team. Fishing is an adventure, and here at Teddy Fisher, we strive to make that adventure a success. Go to www.teddyfisher.co.uk to see our full range of baits.
Hello and welcome to the big chat, the first one of Series 2. And because he was so popular the first time round, we had to invite him back. It's only the legendary Mr. Keith Arthur. How are we, sir?
I'm all right, Dave. Thanks, mate.
Well, thanks for coming back and elaborating on our previous chat. And I don't want to make your head bigger than what it already is, of course. But considering we kicked off 5-6 months ago now, February time, your podcast is still way above the other 5 that I did. So how does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's. You know, I've never been one to, and this might sound ridiculous, but I don't listen to anything I've ever done. I don't watch anything I've ever done because I'm hyper self-critical. So I can't, because I've never listened. I don't know what it's like. I mean, I've got favourite broadcasters, obviously, and I like listening to them. And I don't want to try and emulate anybody or, you know. But anyway, yes, it's very gratifying, mate, considering I've been out of the sort of public domain, if you like. Tight Lines finished nearly 6 years ago now, unbelievably.
Crazy. And
I stopped doing Fisherman's Blues regularly in September 2014. Mm-hmm. I've sat in a few times for Nigel since then, obviously.
Yeah.
And now I can do it without leaving my office, like I'm talking to you. It's like being in the same room with these modern systems. It's beautiful.
It's really interesting because you got all the analytics. It might be boring for the listeners, this, but I get to see the analytics. I see what time of the day it gets listened to, and I can see, and yours is consistently always at the top, right the way through. Mm-hmm. There's only Tommy Pickering that comes anywhere near you. So yeah, great. We had to get you back.
Yeah, I'm. It sounds terrible because I don't want to say I'm not a trumpet blower. Because it makes me sound boastful saying that, and I'm not. I'm out there and I talk to everybody and anybody, and I'm available, and if I can help anybody, I will. So yeah, it's nice to know people still remember me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And what we're going to do, because the first time round, for those that didn't catch episode 1 on Series 1 with yourself, we did a sort of past, present, and future feature, if you like, and we went through pretty much how your career developed from tackle industry right the way through into the broadcasting piece. Well, what we'll do on this one is I've done a little bit of research. I have a piece of literature in front of me, which you know fully well, and it says, Keith Arthur, presenter of Sky Sports, Sightlines and Talk Sports Fisherman's Blues, fishing, the best excuse for loafing in the countryside. So I've had a little scan through this book, and I've picked out a few key things that we can elaborate on, and we'll have some anecdotes because I know you will tell these really well and the listeners will love it, and just go from there, really. So anyway, before we crack on though, how have you been? Because like I say, 5 months since we chatted, things have lifted a little bit, restrictions and whatnot. Have you been out? Have you been doing a bit?
Well, I'll get out a little bit. I've got a bit of a domestic issue.
Yes.
My wife's not very well. Well, she gets now looked after on a Tuesday between 9 and 3:30. So I can pop out for a few hours. And obviously it's very frustrating because if I turn my head slightly, which I won't because you won't be able to hear me and you won't be able to see me doing it anyway, I can see the trees bordering the tidal Thames. So come June the 16th, I can waddle down there when the tide's right and when, everything's looking nice. I can go down there and have a little look down there even after. When she goes to bed, I can shoot down there for a couple of hours, which I did. Yeah. I didn't do it last year because I couldn't, and I did the year before. I tried to catch big roach down there. I've not had any success catching real big uns, but you do catch some nice fish while you're fishing for big roach. Like fishing for big roach on the first day of the season, 2018, I had bream of 8.11, 8.1 and 7.14.
God, yeah. Brilliant.
That was about 2 hours, just 2 hours,
It's not bad at the end of the road, is it? At the bottom of the garden, more or less, yeah. Brilliant.
Literally, I can almost walk there as quick as I can drive there. But by the time I've got in the car and started it up and opened the gate and gone down, I can walk there almost that quickly.
Yeah, you're already there. Well, it's funny you mentioned the Thames there because that's part of what I've got in my notes here, and we'll touch upon that a little bit. But jumping back then to this piece of literature that, as I say, I've done my little bits and pieces on, and elaborating on, you discussed how you started the whole fishing game. You didn't really, like me, you didn't really have anyone in the family to sort of take you and teach you whatever. But you did have, as I've read through this book, is a core of chums, shall we say.
Yeah.
Of mates that you used to go out and about with on various places. And there was one thing that didn't half make me chuckle, because we talk about the Thames, and I've never fished the Thames. There's stretches that I've seen, I've always fancied. I did a lot of work in Windsor for a long time. I always fancied a dabble at Windsor. It's a fantastic stretch of water. And as iconic as Windsor is of course Hampton Court. And you name check the Pope swim.
Yeah,
it's a story that you tell us. Tell us about your mates when you went down and deemed this swim the Pope swim.
The first time I went to Hampton Court, we used to get these things on London Transport, weekend tickets called Red Rovers.
Yes.
They were £5 for adults and £0.50 for juniors, which is 12.5p. And that gave you unlimited weekend travel on London Transport. And London Transport went all over the place. It's a bit like, I suppose, the old geezer's pass that I've got now, like the Freedom Pass. That's even cheaper. That's not even £0.50. And the number 27 bus on Sunday went as far as Hampton Court. And it used to go from the Archway, which is where Rod Stewart comes from, sort of north-ish London. And I used to take the whole journey. It was a hell of a ride. And when it didn't go to Hampton Court, there was another bus, a trolley bus, a 667 that you could get on that took you to Hampton Court station and walk down to the river. And the first time I went in, I was a kid, and it was a big river, and I couldn't float fish very far because you can see the bottom as far as you could float fish. So I chucked out a ledger with some worms I'd dug and caught 47 Pope, Tommy Ruff. And a roach. I was disgusted with the roach because I'd never seen these little Tommy Ruff before. They were, 5 or 6 inches long, some of them, and I was intrigued by them. And we had a few incidents happen there. It's still exactly the same now. So where this swim is, it's the confluence of the River Mole.
The Mole, yeah,
it's where the Mole flows into the Thames, just downstream of Hampton Court Bridge, exactly opposite Hampton Court Palace. The bit there they call the galleries, which is the gallery windows inside the palace. The galleries are on the other bank, and there were loads of stories. We were there, a little clutch of us one day, and we actually saw the rain coming downstream from Molesey Lockish, just above Hampton Court Bridge. Of course, one of the record barbel, when the record barbel was £14.6, one of the record barbel was caught from Molesey Weir, and there's been £16, £17 caught there, huge chub caught there recently, huge bream, everything.
Yeah,
it's now mostly taken up by bivvy dwellers. There's a lot of long stay anglers.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Anyway, we watched this torrential downpour coming down the river, and we left our rods at the bottom, and we went up to the top under the big trees. I think they're conker trees. I mean, I've not been there for such a long time, mate. The last time I was there was filming for Tight Lines, would have been 96 or 97.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
we did a series. I can't remember what even the series was called, but it was a bit like the book, really. It was places I used to go, revisited, and with the music of the time. And I think, was it there I was singing "I Only Want to Be With You," the Dusty Springfield song?
Well, I can't remember. Anyway, 63, I want to say.
Yeah, 63, 64, that kind of time, you know. And in fact, it must have been there because they ran across to the other bank to film me. So I'm on my own, and I think I was trying to catch dace and roach on a stick float, and it was very difficult. I think I had a couple of bream, actually, and that was about all. Anyway, I've got one of these bream, and I'm playing the cameraman's on the other bank. It's quite wide there, 60, 70 metres wide. And they're filming away, and I've netted this fish and put it back. And I've started singing "I Only Want to Be With You." And you won't believe this, but I swear to you it's true. They phased my voice into Dusty Springfield's voice on the programme, and it was in tune.
Well, there you go.
How about that? Yeah. Anyway, this day we're all up under the trees, and we're watching this rain come along. And one of the blokes was this bloke called Mickey Fagg. He was all right, but he lived above the dentist in Manor Gardens in Holloway. We all had to go to get our teeth out, and we blamed him every time we had a fill-in because he lived upstairs at a dentist surgery. Anyway, we were up the top there, and it was probably me, but it might have been someone. Mick, you got a bite. And it's a steeply sloping bank, and he ran down the bank, and it was a bit like the road runner when he runs off, when the Wile E. Coyote runs off a cliff chasing the road runner. His sort of legs were moving in midair with the river underneath him, and he was a bit too large for the air to support him. He ran straight into the river. That was quite funny.
Did he get the fish?
I've no idea. Don't doubt it. Weren't a bite. We didn't have a bite. No, we were lying.
That's exactly the story that is in the book. It's exactly what I wanted you to explain as well, because I could visualise this thunderstorm going on and all these kids huddled underneath a tree. You've got a bite. Yeah. This little fat kid runs and ends up in the drink. Brilliant.
Well, one of the problems with the stories in that book, they're largely you should have been there stories. And people that just read it as a piece of prose, you know, might not get the humour that I try to put into it. Writing humour is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's a personal thing. And, you know, I can read some things. Some things make me laugh every other month, like Roger A's Profanosaurus in Viz makes me laugh every single double month. But and so it's quite difficult. But yeah, that was Mickey Fagg at Hampton Court. Yeah,
that's
and
right.
The Pope.
And that sort of that story then feeds through. And what I was going to go through is this link to these favourite venues of yours.
Oh yeah,
and obviously the Thames, you know, features heavily in the book and in our discussions and your life, considering you've lived by the river now 40 years or whatever. So,
I can tell you another story that might not be in the book before you do that, because this was quite funny as well. We went up to the Lee, to the Crown Fishery. We were staying overnight on the Crown Meadow. And one of the blokes used to come with us, Tony Jeffries. He finished up in the RAF, actually. And he was usually, he was one of us, but he was one that tended to have jokes played on him.
Oh,
and he went into his sleeping bag, took his shoes off. So we filled his shoes up with baked beans and launched them onto the river.
Oh, shocking! Floating
down the river with baked. That was Anyway, sorry, the Thames. Yes.
No, there's a few things like that. There was another one where you've fished a match and you've I think you was waiting in a cafe at a railway station to get the train home or something, and you'd stitched this guy up with his pie with some hemp and maggots.
It was a club outing. Yeah, that was Derek Marsh.
Said it tasted better than his first slice.
You mentioned Windsor. This was Windsor and Eton Riverside Station, and I think it was Derek Marsh stitching up my old mate Brian Gent, who's still very much around. In fact, we had a conversation on Facebook 10 minutes before I started talking to you about catching barbel on the Thames at Staines. And Gent has always been a bit of he was secretary of my first proper club, the Tamesis club that went from Northampton, famous LIA Shield club. And we used to go by minibus, and believe it or not, we used to pay 10 bob, 50 pence for a bloke to drive us all to where we wanted to go on the Thames, not each.
No.
That was 10 bob between us. A coach was a £5. Big coach was a £5. Anyway, we've got with this one. We went by train, so we've gone to Waterloo, Windsor and Eton, Riverside, and in the station buffet after the match, and had this apple pie, and I'm sure it was. He said, "Oh, that was good. I'm going to have another bit of that." So, so he went up and he said, "I'm just going to Carsey." So we got the pie and he had it on the table, nice handful of hemp and handful of maggots in it. Put the lid back on it. This is lovely. This pie. Really better than the first bit. Yeah, that was gently. Anyway.
Him up like a kipper. Yeah, the Thames. So over the years, obviously it's on your doorstep. It's a favourite of yours. We spoke not long ago actually about, I told you about a stretch I wandered with work. It was the Old Windsor, where it looked absolutely fantastic for a waggler along that far bank and whatnot. But you're saying there's a lot of night fishing on there. There's a lot of big barbel, big bream. Then obviously the main river, the tidal stretch is fishing as well as it's ever done. So how's the evolution of the Thames been over the years? Because I know you're a big conscious of the pollution for sure with the Thames. So tell us about one of your favourite rivers.
Well, the big pollution down here was the Mogden sewage works in 2007 that wiped out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of fish. The forecourt at Kew was paved with baby flounder. There were tiny bass died. It killed a lot of fish. It was the perfect storm. It happened in July. There'd been no rain for a couple of months. So all we've got combined sewage overflows designed by Mr. Bazalgette. In Victorian times, and they work by sort of two channels, a low channel and a high channel. And when the high channel fills up, it overflows into the low channel, which goes straight into the river rather than into the sewage works. And that was that. And then when it goes to the sewage works, they store the stormwater in tanks. Well, if the tanks are full of crap that's waiting to be treated, the crap gets pumped into the river. And it's not now. It's much better now. They've rebuilt Mogden sewage works, cost about 50 mil, but that's done. And now we're getting the Tideway tunnel built as well. So it'll all be history in another 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But it wiped out loads of the Thames. It came back ridiculously quickly because it's tidal. So the tide goes up and down and fish move into the empty areas once the pollution, the deoxygenation has gone, once there's oxygen back in. Yeah. And there was this knot of polluted water gradually getting diluted going up and down the river. One of the big problems is on the river is the flow. Up until 1992, there was a minimum statutory flow requirement down here at Teddington Lock, and it had to be, I think it was 275 million gallons a day. It was a lot of water.
Is that measured at the lock, is it?
Yeah. There's a flow station there. Yeah. It had to put at the weir, had to flow over the weir every day, and that was the law. And when the NRA was disbanded in 92 or 94, whenever it was, and it all went under the auspices of the newly formed Environment Agency, that went out the window. And in 2014, which was the last year I was able to gather information, it reached the minimum flow levels 14 days out of 365.
God, yeah. Crazy.
And when you look at the river, at what used to be normal flow, it now looks like it's in flood. You know, Richmond used to be a stick float stretch, always had enough flow to fish a stick float because of the river coming over Teddington Weir. It's shallower, it's quite narrow than the river above Teddington Weir, and you could always go down and fish a stick float. I swear to you, Dave, I could go down there now in the summer, chuck out a waggler, come home, make a cup of tea, drink it, go back down, and the float won't have moved unless a boat's gone through.
I remember you doing a feature, I think it was something, remember like the old art of fishing or whatever it was, years and years ago, and it was I think you did one with David Hall as well on there, and you had the old Daiwa bait apron on, hemp caster, fishing it like, you know, as if you was in the middle of Nottingham or whatever. Do you know?
Yeah, I directed a film there. Well, I was technical director on a film there with Steve Gardner.
Yes,
fishing on the steps at the top of River Lane.
That rings a bell.
I think he fished a waggler. I think he might have fished 6 metres to hand as well.
You can't. I mean,
don't get me wrong. There's still loads of fish there, but we've had loads of problems as well recently. There's been seals living in the river, still are living in the river, and we had a whale here. You might have seen that on the national news a couple of weeks ago. That was, you know, you couldn't get a car down my road. You couldn't get a car anywhere near the river by the people come to look at this whale. And I said, as soon as it was announced, I said, that'll die. Oh, don't say that. They're going to rescue it. I said, it'll die.
Yeah.
How can you rescue a thing that big? How are you going to pick it up? Where are you going to get it? They put this float thing underneath it, started towing it upstream, if you don't mind, so a vet could examine it, and it wiggled off.
Yeah.
And they'll always swim into the flow. This is what you remember when we had the Great Northern Bottlenose Whale in the Thames, or the Northern Bottlenose Whale. I spent 10 hours in the Sky News studio on the Saturday explaining to people it was going to die. And I explained to them exactly why it was going to die and how it was going to die. And they were, oh, no, we've got this helicopter coming and this big barge and crane. It's going to die, mate. It's going to keep swimming into the current. And as the tide changes, it's going to go the other way again. And then it's changed, it goes back again.
Yeah. Even if you put it back in the sea, it can't look after itself. So that's why it's in the river.
Well, the minke whale that was here couldn't. Certainly, it probably wasn't even weaned. It was only a babby. Anyway, yeah, the river. So it's changed an awful lot in the amount of flow, and it's evolved. You know, rivers evolve. And if I go back to mention the days back there in the 60s when I joined the Tamesis, we fished to London Anglers Association size limits, and we had a club match every single week. A club outing. It wasn't a match. We didn't compete with each other. We went to learn new swims for the big London Anglers Association matches that were all rovers. And we went to try different swims out. And it was almost all dace in those days, with the odd perch, the odd roach, very, very rarely a chub. And, you know, we put the flags out if between us, and there were at least 8 of us, and usually 12 went every week. So in I think it's 26 weeks, between June and Christmas, if we had 1,000 goers, 1,000 sizable fish between us in that 26 weeks, it was a cause for celebration.
Wow.
Now I can go down the tidal now on a decent day down it. Well, when the tidal matches in the 80s, I knew I was going to catch 125 dace. and that was the average catch. It was 100 for me. It was 125 days. If they were big enough, I'd win the match. Sorry?
What would that come in at? £20?
Sometimes, if they were big enough, they'd come in a bit bigger. I had 116 dace and a flounder on one match for £27.7.
Yeah.
They were good sized dace. And now there's loads of all sizes of dace down there, and all sizes of roach and perch and, you know, hybrids and bream and everything.
Well, I remember reading an article where I think he's gone on Tony Curd. He's gone up somewhere, your end of the river, and he's absolutely smashed out £150 a bream in like 3 hours.
Oh, just up the road,
yeah.
But there was a club match one with 290 odd £290 at Kingston.
Good God!
But but there's £6 a piece. You know, they're great big. They're getting less now. There's much fewer of those huge bream, but there's another couple of year classes coming through. There's a lot more chub on the lower river now than there ever was, even on the tidal. Don't seem to catch the proper ones, but you get loads up to about 6 or 7 inches. Don't get anything much bigger than that, but obviously they're there, because otherwise they wouldn't be 6-7 inches.
You just said about a goer. A goer to the listeners is a fish that conforms to the rule that you can put.
That met the minimum size limit. So, gudgeon.
7 inch?
Well, it depends. Gudgeon were 5 inches. Bleak were either 4 or 5 inches if they counted at all, but normally they wouldn't count. Dace would be 7. Roach were 8, and then that was reduced to 7 when there was a shortage of roach. They discovered that an 8-inch roach averaged 10 years old, believe it or not, on the Thames in 1963. Reading University did loads of samples of fish in their Pangbourne, Reading, all around that area. Perch were 9 inches, bream, chub were 12, barbel was 16, tench that you never caught, I think, were 10. And silver bream were 12 inches as well. And a 12-inch silver bream's an appreciable size fish. You know, the record was only a couple of pound, or was. I equalled the record once, but there was another one bigger in the waiting list. I won down here £1.12, fishing for barbel.
Do you call them pommies down there like we do?
No, that was more the Trent thing. Pomeranians, they used to call them, didn't they? Gustas is another one. No, we just called them. I mean, a lot of people called them hybrids, but they were silver bream. There was, my mate's pub had one caught by an old timer, set up in a glass case of £3.2 that came from the Thames at Pangbourne. Much bigger than the record, but all the old records were discredited in, I think, the 70s, and they were all the records I remembered, like the 13.2 bream and the 8.8 tench and the 14.6 barbel, they all disappeared. But if you want to see the evolution of a river, one of my very favourite stretches, a stretch where I was so lucky and very successful, was Medley. Fabulous bit of river.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't discover it until the mid-80s. I didn't discover the fishing at Medley. Everybody fished there. There were loads of matches there. And by then it evolved, because it used to be all gudgeon, but somebody would catch a couple of chub or a bream or something to go with the gudgeon and they'd win.
Yeah.
Well, by the time I'd got there was still some gudgeon, but the chub had grown. That 76, 77 year of the chubs up and down the country, there were lots of chubs. So I used to just take a bucket of maggots and 2 waggler rods and keep firing out maggots until I caught chub. And mostly I did. And it was brilliant, just fishing a waggler. And once I'd caught 3 chub, as soon as I had 2 on the drop, I'd shallow up and just fish 2.5 foot deep. It's only 5-6 foot deep anyway.
Yeah.
I'd fish 2.5 foot deep and cast out in the swirly water behind a boat, and the float had disappeared, a line would go tight, and it'd be a 2.5 pound chub. It was just great fishing. I didn't have any huge weights there. I had a 27.9 roach, but only came 4th with that. I had a couple of 30s. I had a 29 odd mixed bag of roach, skimmers, dace and little chub. I had lots of 20 pound, lots of sort of 15 to 25 pound weights as well. In fact, the first 17 matches I fished there, I won 11.
Wow. Great record. Yeah, brilliant.
I was dead lucky, mate. I just happened to draw where the fish were, and I didn't fiddle about. I didn't have any methods. I set up a 3 treble A waggler with 3 number 10s down, 3 number 8s down on one rig, 3 number 10s down on the other, and 5 maggots until the float kept going under. It was easy as that. So, all you didn't want was an easterly wind which came off Port Meadow opposite. But how that evolved, as the flow dropped, weed took over.
Yes. And
in the weed there were perch. So chopworm and the long pole came into play. People started fishing chopworm on the long pole. One bloke won a match there with 64 pound of perch. And we rarely caught perch on wag and mag, maybe because we were only fishing 3 foot deep most of the time. But we didn't catch many perch. Suddenly there's this 64 pound of perch has been caught. And then people would be winning the matches like with 15 pound of perch and 2 tench.
Yeah.
And suddenly, but the river stopped flowing because of the weed. So the whole thing changed. And then it started to become a bream river, and huge, like 100 pound bags of bream of one matches there. It's just changed out of all recognition. But last couple of years, there's been plenty of roach caught on hempen tears. There's signs of chub coming back, sort of pound and a half fish are now being caught. So maybe it'll go through another cycle. But it's over the sort of 35 years that I've known it, it's evolved 3 or 4 different phases of angling.
And I guess when you live on a waterway like that, you see it day in, day out, and you can, you're chatting to people and you can see its moods. It's really interesting. I guess once I get my head around the Trent up here, I'll probably have similar discussions. I'll find some old timer who will tell me about how that river's changed or that stretch or whatever it may be. So,
You've only got to look. I mean, forget the bits much downstream of Nottingham where it's just stocked and restocked with barbels that come out the Trent to supply eggs and supply fry and eggs to Calverton Fish Farm.
Calverton, yeah.
And I think they put half or 60% or some number of them back as fry, which is far more than would survive naturally. So there's a lot of barbel. Once you get down below East Stoke, there's loads and loads of barbel. There used to be quite a lot more upstream, but they've gradually phased out. But I mean, when I first fished the Trent in the 70s, it was just turning from a roach to a chub river. Before that, it had been all chub, 40 pound of roach, all roach rather, 40 pound of roach. Kevin won a 4-hour match with, on the stick. And there was so much foam on the river, people used to knot matchsticks 4 feet above their float. So the float would be under the foam and the matchstick would be on top of the foam. And when the matchstick disappeared into the foam, it was a fish.
You're joking. That's brilliant.
No, I'm not joking. No, that's true. But when I started going, it was mostly chub. Dave Thomas had started the maggot revolution, and it was more maggots than casters. First match I fished on the Trent, I kept trying to catch them on casters, and all I caught on casters were gudgeon. Every time I put maggot on, I'd catch a couple of roach. Think, the roach are in. I put a caster on and not catching any. And it took a long time for that penny to drop. But yeah, that's a much changed river, and now there's loads of dace, which is very few days. The national where I was second in 1980, the first 5 casts, I had 5 days.
Well, we'll get to that. We will get to that in a minute. But just to finish off on the Thames piece, I've jumped ahead a little bit with the Trent. So I'm going to say a name, Twiggy.
Yeah. Twiggy.
And we touched on it very, very slightly on the first one. We spoke about the evolution of a river, the evolution of a method. So tell us about Twiggy. What a great name. And it's not the singer.
No, well, Bill Twigg, he was a strange bloke. He was the nearest thing you've ever seen to a human Toby jug.
What's it? Oh, the big nose?
Yeah, humpty back.
Yeah.
And he used to go fishing in summer in a blazer and grey flannels.
Lovely.
And in the winter, an overcoat. And if it was colder, 2 overcoats. And if it was really, really cold, 3 overcoats tied with a bit of string around the middle.
Sounds like a scarecrow.
All his gear was in a carry. He had long hair, long wavy hair going down past his shoulders, glasses, a bulbous nose. He was a lovely bloke, but very secretive. And by trade, he was a plastic moulder. And he made the first block end feeder that I'd ever seen. And I'll tell you how secretive he was. When I joined the Tamesis, the clubs in those days on the big London Angler Association matches had to provide stewards.
Yes.
And because I was the youngest one in the team and the newest one in the team, I had to be a steward. But I wasn't only a steward, I was also a spy.
Of course you were.
Because I used to have to watch where the named anglers from the named clubs went and fished, and watched how they fished these particular swims so we could log them in our records if we ever drew a match there on the LAA Shield, or we were there on the Thames Championship, Thames Benevolent, whatever. And I was on stewarding this LAA. It must have been the Thames Benevolent because it was at Maidenhead. Thames? I'm sure it was Thames Benevolent. It was at Maidenhead.
Yes.
And the wall just behind the sounding arches, there's some sounding arches, a railway bridge on the Thames, and downstream of that is the famous wall.
This is the Brunel area, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but it's a Brunel railway bridge, very, very famous railway bridge. Great Western, when the old 125s came out, they'd go over the bridge. And Twiggy was fishing on the wall. So I sort of surreptitiously watched him from about 5 or 6 swims away, pretending to be talking and doing my steward's job. And somebody would hook a fish. If anybody caught a big fish or fish that looked like it was dying, they used to call for the scales. You used to have to run along with the scales and weigh it and put it back. Weren't allowed to weigh in dead fish. But if someone caught one that was nearly dead, you'd weigh it for them. All the fish in those days were carried to a central weighing point as well.
Yeah.
So they all went in canvas buckets full of water, and we walked them down to a central point, weighed them in, and watched them all float away afterwards.
I was going to say, there must be some mortality rate.
Lots of them did. And Twiggy was hooked a barbel. So he's hooked a big fish. And all big fish you hooked on the Thames in those days were barbel. Some of them were probably perch, some of them were probably carp that you didn't see. But you hooked a big fish, it was a barbel. So I've walked down behind Twiggy and I watched him. And he's put the rod down and stood on it. Rather than show me his feeder, he wouldn't mind the fishing. It was the rod was an Apollo Ross. It was a tubular steel salmon spinning rod, and lots of the best anglers used them for ledgering. Usually with a bite indicator. Well, with the block end, you didn't need a bite indicator. You needed a strong grip to stop the rod being towed into the river, and he wouldn't net it.
That's what we call secretive, yeah.
And then, in the end, I had to walk away, and then he netted it. And he had a few days to go with this barbel. Anyway, me and my mate Brian, whose parents owned a pub in Highgate Village, said, "Here, Twig, fancy a day on the Thames?" "Oh, yeah, that'd be good." And he loved to drink, Twiggy. He loved to drink.
Yeah.
So we took him to Hurley on the Thames, which is towards Henley.
Mm.
And there were 2 pubs there. There was, I think, it was the East Arms and the Black Boy. And I think we went into the Black Boy at lunchtime and we got him absolutely legless.
This is to get the secret out of him, is it?
Oh, he was completely blotto. Never drove. And I think Brian had a Lotus Cortina, and then he got a Corsair GT. And I think this might have been the Corsair GT. He got it brand new, C-Reg. So that would have been 1965.
Yeah.
And we've gone back to the pub, and Twiggy took all his gear in pillowcases. And one of his pillowcases had maggots in and these feeders. So we nicked one. And it was shaped like an egg. There was a tube through the middle with an elastic band going through it. with a top that you open, with a matchstick holding the elastic band in place. So he always had a box of matches with him because they used to break. And you flipped the lid open and filled it up with maggots, just like the Drenham feeder bombs.
Yeah.
In fact, like a feeder that I eventually developed from the original Drenham feeder link using Twiggy's principle. That would have been in about 1980. I did that. So, 15 years longer after Twiggy had it. And we got this, and we worked out a way that we could make these feeders. And another one of our pals who's long dead, so I can tell you this story. He was a cable jointer for the London Electricity Board, and he used to nick loads of cable out the ground and sell it. And the core of the cable was copper, thick copper. He used to get a lot of money for that. And it was coated in lead.
Yeah.
And he used to sell some of the lead, but he'd keep some of it for making weights with. So we had these strips of lead that Billy had. We went to a shop in Holloway Road, Henry J. Nichols, 308 Holloway Road, where they sold fishing tackle and equipment for making model aeroplanes, including their windows. And they sold 3-foot square sheets of Perspex. So we bought this Perspex, cut it to size, punched individual holes in it with a leather punch, rolled it up, stapled it with my mate Billy's carpet stapler, wrapped lead on it, and we bought 300 split shot boxes from another tackle shop, Whaley's in Hornsey Road, 456 Hornsey Road, and the split shot boxes, and we cut the bottom off the box. The little tubs that split shot come in.
Yeah.
So we cut the bottom off, stapled the rim to the plastic tube, and they put the lid on. The bottom didn't open, the top did. And you put your maggots in, chucked out, and it was deadly. I mean, Billy Harris himself, that was me, Billy Allen, used to make those feeders, and Bill eventually got a bloke called Eddie Meadows. Billy Harris got a bloke called Eddie Meadows to make thousands, and we had a cupboard in his house, and the shells in it bowed with the weight of feeders on them. And he used to fish 8-pound bell line direct, and an 8-pound bell would make pretty good strimmer material. It's strong, stiff, thick, horrible line. Yeah. He used to use 8-pound bell and a size 10 hook, and he'd start with 3 maggots, and if he got bitted out, he'd go down to 1.
Well, I guess the benefit of the whole block end piece is that, ground bait feeders would have been used, but the ground bait attracting the small stuff. So I guess
small fish,
about getting the substance in.
Well, these feeders weighed like 2 ounces, and he'd get through a gallon of maggots every week, Bill.
Yeah.
And as the feeder would hit the surface, and as soon as these feeders weighed a couple of ounces, the feeder would hit the surface, and the rod tip would be going.
Yeah.
And he'd have a dace on a size 10 hook and 1 maggot.
Yeah.
Don't want to give him too many, he'd say. Don't want to spoil them. And when he was brilliant, he used to fish for barbel on them too. And he'd fish a size 6 hook. And if he was getting daced, he'd put a single maggot on that as well.
Crazy.
On a 6 hook. Unbelievable. The fishing then was just unbelievable. Yeah. But like everything else, they get used to it, they suss it out, and then it turned into a roach river. By the mid-70s, it was fishing big floats down the middle with casters, loose feeding, hempen caster, fishing derivations from Pat Richardson's dumpy float. Pat developed this float for fishing the deep Medway. Everything was top and bottom. There was no such thing as a waggler going back then. So these were top and bottom floats, like imagine an Avon, but with the body at the bottom.
I got it. Yeah.
And it'd be fished top and bottom. They used, for the Thames, you wanted to take about 3 swan with a number 4 underneath that. And we used to fish plateau strong, 4.2 pound plateau strong, because casting those big floats takes it out of your line.
Yeah.
And before Fuji guides, we were getting through 3 sets of rod rings a year. Plateau strong was so hard, it would cut through the normal chromed high bells.
Yeah. No, good, love it. All right, then. So thinking about these special venues to you, moving on from the Thames, let's talk about the Trent then, as we just touched upon it. And I know you've done this story to death over the years, I guess, but it is what you was famous for, I guess, at the time. Unlucky, but Division 1 National. Try and explain to the younger listeners how how big, well, it still is, but it was then.
Well,
and what happened?
Yeah. It was then. You're right. 12 teams of 80 teams of 12, 960 anglers.
Mm-hmm.
It was a team event. No individuals. The pegging was tight then. You now get about 3 pegs on the Trent for every peg there used to be, and just concentrating on my day, I drew peg G69.
Was this for was you fishing for the LAA?
This was fishing for London Anglers Association, yeah. I only fished them for one more year. I think it might have been the last year. We had a big fallout. Anyway, that's another story. So I've got this peg, and it's near Southall. It's the bottom end of Fiskerton. Caythorpe, bottom end of Caythorpe. And there's a couple of blokes fishing feeders on the other bank. So I set up a feeder with the hope I wouldn't have to throw it. And I set up a waggler and a stick float. And this swim, I was on the end of some whips, some Phragmites, I suppose, like reeds sticking up, sedges sticking up. No, sedges have edges. These were reeds. Reeds are round, sedges have edges, and grasses, like grasses, have holes. That's the
there's a proverb.
That's the way.
Yeah,
that's the way to tell a reed from a sedge from a grass. And so what you used to do was try and nick a yard. So you stood within a yard of your peg, but obviously upstream, so you got an extra trot down. So I trod down some of these reeds. It was a very rocky bank, and I was standing on these rocks. Always never sat down to fish. And I got my bait apron and my catapult, my keep net landing net and everything. And you weren't even allowed to plumb up before the match.
Oh.
So, and I don't put any shot on my line until I've plumbed up. When I'm fishing a stick float, no shot goes on my line maybe a number 10 at the bottom or a number 8, but that's the only shot that goes on because every swim is unique. Every bit of flow is unique, and I set my shot up to match the flow. So stick floats on winders is never going to happen to me.
No, same here.
So I had a 4x4 Max Winters stick float, and I put the plummet on, went in, and I had the depth set without knowing the depth. So it was the depth I wanted. It was like 4.5, 5 foot.
Yeah.
And the float stood on, I set my stick float with the float standing on the water. So I fished the length of the stick over depth.
Yeah.
So I flicked out some maggots, pulled my float, and there were swirls where I'd thrown these maggots. Oh, bleak. That's all I need now. Anyway, I'm shotting up, still throwing some maggots in, shotting the float up, got it in, run it down with no bait on. Got it there. That needs another number 8. Got that on, or another number 6. Got that on. Yeah, that's about right now. And I liked my in those days when it flowed. I liked my float to just sink. So by keeping the line floating on the surface, you'd keep it in float. So keep it afloat. So your float wanted to go under. Its natural movement was downwards. So you got the fish felt absolutely nothing as it pulled the float down.
Get it.
That's no resistance. That's right. So I've put a maggot on, single maggot, an 18 1217B, the old Olean doors. These were when the Mustad 90340s had gone bad, and the Camasan B510s weren't out yet. So we were in between hooks. I had these Olean door 1217Bs, which were blue barbless, and I used to sharpen the point a bit because I had a very, very long point. So I put 2 maggots on. Did what I always do, cast the float halfway down my peg, pulled it back towards me, threw a handful of maggots on top of it, took my finger off the bail arm, the float cocked up and kept going, struck, dace about 2 ounces. Throwing it in, I knocked it, dropped it in again, next cast, another dace, dropped it in again, another dace, 5 dace. Then I had a roach about 4 ounces. I thought, this is good. I've been told that £3 on this section is going to be a weight. £3 going to get you in the point. So I thought, well, drink up. This is looking good. And I've got a couple more roach, and I'm about 3/4 of an hour in, and I've had a chub. This was maybe £1.5, I suppose.
And
I was using
in the bag, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my section points. That's me 20 points or 60 points out of 80 as it was then. And I was using a Mitchell match where the line comes off the wrong way, so you have to strike and clonk the handle shut. Now I use the old, still over 30-year-old Diver 1657 DMs with a finger dab that you can close manually. But you had to clonk this shut. 12-foot Normark NMRB rod. The I had different whippings on every section because I used to build them for people. And you know, if a ring came off my rod, I just used whatever whipping was handy. And so I've got this chub. Oh, this is good. So I've upped the feed a little bit. I've got a gallon. I'm not going to take any home. So I'm chucking back, and I've started to catch chub quite steady. Yeah. And I was catching most of them about 4 foot from the bank, about a foot upstream of the bloke below me's keep net.
Love it.
So every time I struck, it was blah, 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 and he'd look round. And every time he looked round, he would, when he looked back again, he would turn another 5 degrees downstream, so he couldn't see what I was doing. And I didn't find out until several years later. That was Steve Jackson.
Oh, really?
Now, Jacko, who won Fisher, he was young. Yeah. He was 18, 19 then, I think, because he told me, he told me himself, and, you know, I think he had he got 1 chub. I think he had about £3. So I'm catching these chub, and there's quite a crowd gathering behind you. But people wouldn't appreciate this today, but the best pegs and the best anglers had crowds waiting for them to arrive.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't in that league, but when people see you catching fish
and all the rest of them, they would have had behind.
Yeah. So when people see Jimmy Randall was 2 pegs upstream, 2 pegs upstream me. So when you see landing nets going out, and you get a crowd accumulated, and we had this bloke who used to fish the Southern All Stars Top 40 called Ray Betts, and he had an affliction, and he used to cough. Like he'd be talking. Really loud, used to make you jump. and I've got this crowd behind me, and I've got blinkers on, like I'm not seeing anything. All I'm seeing is my floating knees chub, and suddenly, oh Jesus Christ! And it's Ray Betts, and he was a steward. He fished Pulborough, I think, and he's scrambled down the bank next to me. How you doing, Keith? So I've got £10 or something. I didn't have more than that. So £10 or something. Ray, catching your chub. She said, oh, good, yeah, you're doing all right. I said, oh, great, okay, go away. I don't want you making all this coughing noises while I'm fishing. I've caught a couple more chub, and he's gone. And I've got these chub are all lovely fish. And I've got one struck, netted it, and it was the skanky looking thing. It was the one that gets caught every week.
Yeah.
You know, scales missing. It would have been like one of those scruffy kids when you were a kid that only had a mac and holes in his socks. So I've got this chub, and it's hardly wriggled. I've unhooked it, and I've net the fish, put the landing net inside the keep net, unhook it, lift the landing net out the way, and drop it. So as I've lifted the landing net out the way, I've caught the tail of the fish. It's flicked, and I've dropped it. It's hit the rim, sort of teetered there for a second and gone the wrong side. Now, I could probably have bent down and picked it up.
Yeah.
But I've got a bait apron on, full of bait. I've got disgorgers and I don't know. Ha! And I've heard this, from behind me as it's happened. So I've looked around and said, don't worry, I'll get another one in a minute. And completely blasé because, you know, I know I've got £20 in the net.
Yeah.
And we've been told that £12 will win the section. So, you know, I think, well, I've got my points. It's a team event. You don't think about winning the match. Anyway, £60 going to win the match from the Weirfield. £60 won it the week before, £50 won it the week before that. The Weirfield, where they catch the big barbel now, that was always going to win the match.
Yeah.
So it died in the afternoon. I really struggled for the last hour and a half. I might have caught a roach. I don't think I caught another chub. I caught a couple more chub after this one. I had a huge roach as well. I had a roach 110 in amongst the chub because Jimmy Randall called out. It was after about 3 chub. I've got this big roach, and Jimmy Randall was 2 pegs upstream. Lovely Jimmy Randall, sadly no longer with us. Fished for Essex County. The same Pete Burrell won the national that day, fishing 2 pegs above Gary Evans, our Gary Evans from the LAA. And Jimmy Randall shouted, "Spawny old Keith, got another lucky chub." So I've got this roach, you know how you hold them with your fingers behind its pectoral fins. I hold it. I said, "No, Jim, it's a roach, look." And he went, "Oh, my God," because it was a proper roach, proper big. Anyway, so I've pulled the net out of wading, you know, 4 ways, £8 scales. £27, 6.25. I don't even look at the scales. I never do. Why is the salesman going to cheat me?
Yeah.
Why is someone? I'm a nice bloke. Why is anybody going to fiddle me? So I don't even look at the scale. So £27, 6.25, and I'm glowing. And I'm it's the 27th of September, 2 days before my birthday. Yeah. So I've got an early birthday present. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. Anyway, back in the coach. No cars in those days. You went to the venue by coach. You went back by coach. So I've got on the coach, and Jimmy Randall's had £16. I think he's come third on the section, and the bloke from Stoke City between us, which was Kevin Asher's team at that time. Kevin was 8th on the match, by the way, and they're all going, "Oh, well done, yeah, you could win it with that." I said, "No, Weirfield's fish really hard. We our runners have told us there's no fish on the Weirfield hardly." Yeah, well, I ain't going to win it. There's going to be Gunthorpe Bridge, or, the road is going to throw up some fish. Stoke Bardolph will throw up some fish. So when I've got back, I've got out the coach, and Gary Evans, who was on the Weirfield, has come towards me. He said, "You've had a weight, ain't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What you had?" I said, £27. He said, "27 what?" I said, "Hang on a minute, I'll have a look." And I got my weigh ticket out, which I've still got. I think there's a little box here. It might still be in that little box. I said, "Yeah, 27.64. He said, "I think you've won it." He said, "Burrell's had a £27. He said, "But I think it's 27.4. Might be 27.8. And of course it was 27.8.
Yeah.
So I was an ounce and 3/4. I was another day's light. But yeah, Beverly Adams, who was then a reporter for the Anglers Mail, collared me in the headquarters and said, "Oh, you must be gutted." I said, "Bev, have a look around. There's 960 people here. 958 of them will swap."
Yes, I like
There's only one bloke that won't swap me now, and I've just put him down because I carried him in my arms for the Angling Times photo. I said, "He's the only bloke that don't want to be me." And as I'd gone up to get my medals, Kevin Ashurst was obviously been up to collect his. He had 2 as well. He won his section and the individual 8th medal. And I drew next to him once on an LA versus Birmingham Anglers Association match on the Thames. And we both caught several undersized fish and had to throw them back. And as I walked past him, he says, "Us fish size limits today then, Keith." Yeah, so that was that day. And the next day was the first round of our Winter League. We were allowed to fish it early on the Thames because our traditional Thames, the Free Thames League, as it was called, started the last week in September. And the AT Angling Times Winter League, as it was, it didn't start till the first week in October officially. But they gave us dispensation to start it the week before. So there we were at Donington on the Thames. I had £3.13, I think, of mostly skimmers fishing punch bread down the middle. Very, very hard day. Yeah. And 2 young ladies stripped up opposite and went in swimming naked.
In September, brave girl.
Yeah, it was a lovely day, mate. It was a really warm day. And I'd caught these skimmers fishing the bread, so as you can imagine, my towel didn't look like I smell like much. And I offered it to them if they wanted to dry off, but they didn't want it.
No, I wonder why, full of skimmers.
Yeah, it was a good day. They came down, paddled their feet in the water. Then they sort of took their trousers off and paddled their legs in the water. Then they took the lot off and went in for a swim.
What a weekend to remember.
What a weekend. That's why I don't forget it. I don't know which is the best date to remember. The 29th, my birthday, the 28th, the nude women, or the 27th, the national.
Wow. I'm
crap at dates as well, but I do remember those 3.
Yeah, it's just one of those stories that set it. And what I thought, we had to discuss it was because I know somebody tagged you in that. Was it the Angling Times picture or the Anglers Mail picture or whatever? And the conversation started. So it's like, right, we've got to discuss that. I know we've discussed it before, but yeah, great story. And it's good to know you're not bitter. And absolutely not, like you say.
No, there's several things I'm not bitter about. I'm not bitter that Tight Lines did 19 years and 11 months.
I got that theme on the first chat that we had. Yeah, I'm not gutted. Yeah.
No, not bitter at all.
Brilliant.
Bottle of wine after 20 years would have been nice, wouldn't it?
So the carriage clock. That's what you missed out on. The carriage clock.
Yeah.
Oh, great story. Division 1. Okay, brilliant. So we've discussed Thames. We've had a little chat about the Trent there as well.
I used to fish the Trent quite a bit, by the way. It wasn't like, I'm not going to say I just turned up. The only match I ever fished the Trent and came second. I fished quite a few matches. I was, again, the Trent was quite a lucky river to me. I won a few and had a few places and got my butt kicked a couple of times, especially by the John Allerton at Longhiggin, which was the only section of Thames I never really got on with. Didn't like Longhiggin. It was too varied. I wanted to go and go with my stick float already made up. That's what I wanted to do. Sometimes it was a waggler, but I used to really enjoy fishing the Trent. Well, in the days when you could get there and back in a day without sitting for 4 hours in a traffic jam.
That's the problem. You get on that M1 and it's a right old laugh, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk then a little bit about another piece out of the book that's done that. We've never really discussed it with you before. I've mentioned that I've seen a couple of your videos over there, but Ireland. Never been. Always wanted to go, just never had the opportunity. We discussed a little bit with Tom, certainly discussed it with Ian on the podcast. Obviously, he was an ambassador, wasn't he, for the Irish Tourist Board?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Loved it. So
and Northern Irish Tourist Board as well, of course, because the big matches then were all on the ban. I missed the best times on the ban. I've never fished the ban, and the Erne around Enniskillen. I mean, County Fermanagh. I mean, what matches they were. The first year I went with Pete Otterwill, John Larriman, Freddie Brown,
Lasher.
and Lenny Goodwin. Lasher, yeah. We shared a chalet at Killyhevlin. And Pete Otterwill used to get the same chalet every year with a platform outside. So when we got in from the match, having caught God knows how many bream, we could go and catch some more.
A couple more hours, yeah.
Yeah. And the first day of the match, I drew corner grade 24. I'd never been to corner grade. And Pete Ott was our guru. And we'd been out we got there on the Sunday and we'd gone and set up some rigs, and we used Drennan loafers, and I made some Drennan loafers, and I put the plastic bit of a cotton bud as an antenna.
Right, got it.
So I had 5 and 7 gram loafers.
Monsters.
To fish for roach or bream. Big floats. These weren't the plastic loafers. These before that, these were Bogser. I'm going back to the mid, the early 80s, mid 80s. So he said, it's really deep, that swim. He said, it's 9 to hand there. You're short lining, fishing 9 metres to hand. I thought, blimey.
Also with pole fishing, yeah.
Yeah, I'd borrowed a Pro Carbon off someone. They were the poles of the time. They were strong. They didn't break. You could fish them to hand. You could, they were quite slim. They were quite flexible as well. They were a bit heavy compared to modern poles, obviously, but they were strong. Didn't break them. You could swing pound roach on them if you were lucky enough to catch pound roach. So bait wise, we had every day we had a gallon of casters, a gallon of red maggots, and 2 biscuit tins full of breadcrumb, which was 3 parts brown, 2 parts white. That was our mix. Yeah. Pete used to get the breadcrumb. He worked at a bakery, so we'd take it all with us in these vans, and we'd get our bait from Barry Nicholson, the Irish Angling Services.
Yeah.
So I've knocked up a bread tray. This is how we had it set up. We had properly organised. So you had a rope on the bottom of your keep net, so you could pull it from the bottom if you had a huge number of fish, because you didn't want it to burst open at the bottom. And there were no seams on the side. Yeah. So you sort of rolled it up and lifted it out like that. So you tied a rope to the bottom, put that on a bank stick. And then I had a bread tray, a maggot tray, like the 4-gallon maggot trays.
Yeah.
I had one of those full of ground bait next to my left hand. In that was my gallon bucket of maggots and the gallon bucket of casters. So there was a bread tray with those two buckets in, and then behind that was another bread tray full of water. So if you swung a roach out, that you missed the fish, and the line hit your hands and it came off, it went into the bread tray full of water. So you could pick it out afterwards. You could also use it to get most of the crap off your hands.
Yes.
So it was properly organised. Anyway, I've got this swim, and I had this rule of thumb that I'd worked out in Ireland. If you were going to catch bream, I wanted to know how many bream you needed to catch to have a good weight. And at the start, I would throw in 1 ball of ground bait for every bream I wanted to catch. So I didn't know. He said, there might be some roach there, might be some bream. So I hesitated a bit and threw in 15 balls.
Okay.
And then it's a ball of cast.
Yeah.
With a few casters in and a few maggots. And waste of time loose feeding, it's like 15 foot deep. So I've gone and I've started to catch quite quickly. And cut a long story short, I've caught a few fish. I know I've not won. Kevin's drawn corner grade 29, which is like bunghole. So he was always going to win it. So I've weighed in 48 kilos and 60 grams. My first ever match in Ireland.
It's not bad, is it?
So, which is 106 pounds, 108 pounds, something like that. It's a decent weight anyway. So Freddie Brown has come down to meet me. He's driven the van to he was on Queen Elizabeth Road, which is in the middle of Enniskillen. He's come down to meet me, and as he's coming down, Kevin Ashurst is walking up. So he said to me, "How you done, Kev?" He said, "I've had 84 hour." He said, £84. He said, yeah, 84 a kilo. And he said, oh, I'm going to win this in a minute. I was fourth with this 48 kilo, which I was very happy with, because this was a match that there was 3 qualifying rounds and then a final, and it was decided on weight.
Yeah.
So the next day I've drawn corner grade again. I've drawn the other side of the bay, peg 20, which is nowhere near as good. But I fished it the same way, and luckily there were a few bream. I was next to Pete Clapperton. Pete Clapperton fished for roach, and you know, he said, I'm going to catch roach. And that was when he used a great quote to me. The trouble is with fishing here, Keith, you never know if you're in heaven or hell, because you catch a roach every cast. He said, and it's like a golfer. Every shot is a hole in one. He said, is it heaven? Or after a little time, does it turn into hell? Anyway, he set up to fish for roach at 7 metres to hand, and I just did the same, 10 metres to hand in the deep water. And I had another good day of 50 kilo, 380 grams. And Dickie Carr drew the peg I'd been in the previous day. So we had a little match, and he kept, how many you got now, Keithy? 24 bream, Dick. And anyway, we were about fish for fish at the end, and my weight was the biggest ever off that peg of 24. That he drew 48 kilo and 48.60, I think. And he beat it. He had 48 kilo 360. But I had 50 kilo 380, so I took his pound on 50.
And this is all on your first trip?
Yeah, never been there before.
No wonder you got the place.
Yeah, so they said, well, you'll definitely qualify for the final. That was the Wednesday, because the Tuesday we went and fished the Sillies, where Pete Burrell had this weight, and I'd been there, and after I'd had this 48 kilo, Pete Ottawa was taking me there to practice, and I've had 42 pound of roach in an hour, 1 hour timed. I had 42 pound of roach.
Word, that is dream world. I don't know what.
Yeah,
saying that's just unreal.
But they were all up in sort of the wider bit just below the bridge, and I drew down below the bend, and it wasn't so good. I had 72 pound odd, I think.
All roach?
But all roach. I only caught for an hour and a half, and then in like the last 3.5 hours of the match, it was like a good day in England. Yeah. Like you'd get one every so often, but the first hour and a half was carnage. And I was next to Bob Nudd, and I think he had 52 pound, and I won the section. I was lucky because I was MPEG on the section, which was, made a difference. He was on the next section, so I didn't beat him on the section. Anyway, so that was that. So I had 72 pound that day. The next day, I've had the 50 kilo 380. The next day, I've drawn corner grade again, 17, which is not very good at all. So I've decided to have a pleasure day. So I've fished a stick float.
Okay.
Down the edge, fish for roach. I've had 27,770 a roach, 28 kilo a roach, 60 pound basically a roach.
Brilliant.
And then on the final, they had the final on the airport section. This was the Ern Bates Festival, and nobody had ever fished the airport before except Ian Heaps, who'd been there to test fish it for I think it was Anglers World Holidays at the time. He test fished it for them, and he'd caught some fish. And I drew next to John Larriman, funny enough, and he just pipped me. He had one more bream than me, but he was in sort of a bit deeper water and didn't have to fish quite so far out. I had to catapult ground bait that day and fish a big waggler. And I had 38 kilo 610 of mostly roach fishing 6 rod lengths out. and Ray Mumford was on the point, and he won it with 55 kilo and fishing 5 metres a pole. And he lifted out every bream by hand and netted every roach. Wow. Because the roach were too big for him to grip, but he could grip the bream, but float the bream towards him. They come in on their side, don't they? And he could pick it up by the thumb grips, by its pectorals. And at the end of the match, I said, "You use much bait, Ray?" He said, 2 pints of maggots. I said, "Is that all?" He said, "I only give them one each."
Lovely stuff.
That was another quote that I'll never forget. And I was 6th on the final. I think Lasher was 5th. And yeah, that was Ireland then. I mean, it's a shadow of that now. I think Clearwater, what do they call them? Zebra mussels have had an impact on it. Probably cormorant predation. I think certainly hammering the spawning shoals in the close season hasn't helped. The Sillies where Pete Burrell caught those fish, the quality of that sport died a death, because the fish were only in that river in those numbers for spawning. So many fish used to go into the Sillies, the water level would rise so they could swim above the weir.
Wow.
It seems incredible.
I know some of the festivals now, they go for a bit of a renaissance, don't they? There are some good. I mean, Bob Nord, he still loves it, doesn't he? He's over there.
Of course,
some of them. But I think to the scale that you're talking about, there's not as many anglers as there was. So it's hard.
No, and it is now more like English fishing. You know, you're fishing a feed, you're fishing a pole, short line with elastic. And the days of fishing 9 and 10 metres to hand are no more than 7 gram floats. You know, they're gone. You still get big weights, but now they're bream. And the fish, there'd obviously been some great spawning classes because you could count your weight by the number of bream you had. You weighed in a kilo for every bream, basically. Yeah. And if you're on a lot of bream, the roach topped it up. So like my 50 kilo 380, I had 49 bream.
Is that encyclopedic memory of yours again?
We only remember the good days, mate. I've had some right crap days that I don't remember. I'll tell you that.
We won't talk about them then, but
no,
I'm loving that. I may say it's something that I've never had the pleasure to get over there, but maybe one day. One place that I have been, and which we will finish on because this will cover my 3 venues that I wanted you to talk about, is of course Florida.
Oh yeah, I thought you were going to say Scotland or somewhere.
No. We're going to go with some warmer climes than the Thames.
Florida Keys,
Island,
yes, mate. Sure. Oh,
so first time Dyer Works event, I believe.
Yeah, Dyer Sales meeting, 1992. We were promised if we beat our budget by 10%, we'd go somewhere really good for a sales meeting, and we did. And we went to Marathon.
Not bad, is it?
In the Florida Keys.
Where did the love affair start, I guess? I mean, it's great going on a works jolly and fishing for a couple of days, but then to decide, actually, this is going to be my sort of annual pilgrimage with Roy and whatnot.
Well, Roy and Jack Simpson used to go every year. Roy and Jack Simpson have been going since the 70s.
Yes.
Since before the road was actually built. When you drove down there on the disused railway track. They took the railway lines up, obviously, but you're on the railway bridges, these very narrow bridges where if a truck was coming the other way, it was nip and tuck whether you'd get past it.
Yeah.
It was very, very different when they went. But yeah, 92... Marathon. I went again in 93, missed 94, and I didn't miss another year till 2018. And sometimes I went 2 or 3 times in a year, various reasons. I've taken a couple of parties to Key West and fished. Sue came 2008. I went with Sue and a couple of one of my mates and his wife. With different, not for the boys' trip. The boys' trip was sacrosanct. The boys' trip was sort of last week in April, first week in May. Yeah, it was just unbelievable, mate. Unbelievable. The fishing even now is out of the very, very, very top draw.
Yeah.
I mean, when we first went to Key West, a light tackle boat was $300 a day. It's now $1,200 a day. But then when we first went, petrol was 50 cents a gallon. An American gallon. Yeah, but the fishing, when we first went, it was all we used to fish one rod. 20-pound class rod with a TLD loaded with 20-pound Andy mono, 80-pounder or 60-pound Andy leader, and mostly fish for tarpon. If we went and fished for sailfish, we used the same stuff. And we didn't used to go and fish for snappers very much. We'd sometimes fish the bottom for grouper, but not very often. It was mostly tarpon fishing.
Yeah.
And most days, if you got 2 or 3, you'd had a really brilliant day. The best day I ever had was 11, and I was playing fish virtually all day.
I was going to say, I bet you was knackered.
Oh, I was on my own in a boat with Jack Kelly's daughter, Laurie Parker. And we were in a tournament and believe it or not, I didn't win it with 11 tarpon. The bloke who won it had 23.
Oh, my word.
But he had 3 other people on the boat helping him.
Yeah.
So somebody was chumming, somebody was cutting chum, someone was driving the boat. If he didn't have a fish, he'd hand the rod over and someone would wind it in while he ran back with the next rod. He was, he wanted to win that tournament. A bloke called David Stern, a solicitor from, I think it might be north of Miami, but it was that kind of way. Really nice bloke. And he used to fish with a good pal as well. He used to fish with Bruce Cronin on the New Horizons, and we used to quite often fish next to him. And Bruce would always slide his boat over during the day and give me a slice of his wife's apple cake.
Lovely. There was one thing that struck me about the place as well. It was that, the fishing, absolutely spot on, but there's a lot to the islands than, like you say, you've been with the missus, you've been with friends and their wives or whatever. You can actually make a real, If you go for a fortnight, you don't have to fish every day. One, it'd cost you an absolute fortune anyway. But two,
some good beaches, mate. Smathers beaches, a bit good.
Nightlife, restaurants, food's fantastic. People are really nice. And I guess it's one of those, I'd recommend it to anybody, me.
Well, Key West, it's an amazing place. It's 2 miles by 4. And half of it is where people live.
Yeah.
And about a quarter of it is the entertainment sector. I mean, you've got, well, basically it's Duval Street, isn't it? It's half of Duval Street. So you go down Truman to Duval, turn right, and to the end you get to Front Street, Mallory Square. And in that little block is everything. You've got, Sloppy Joe's, Captain Tony's, the Green Parrot, Irish Kevin's, all the bars. You've got all the restaurants.
Live
Kelly
music
McGuinness's
everywhere,
place,
comedians everywhere. Just anything that you want, they've got it. And half of that little tiny island as well is a naval base. It's a fair old bit of land taken up by that as well. And the Mallory Square, they have a party to celebrate sunset every day. And that was started by a bloke who used to sit on his balcony, have a gin and tonic at sunset. And then he got a couple of friends round, and then some more friends came in. He was a bit of a strange bloke. He would dress up every time they came in being something different, like a ballet dancer's tutu or whatever. He was, Key West is the gay capital of the United States, possibly the gay capital of the world. And homosexuality is embraced there. It's not sordid. It's not nasty. And there's, I well up every time I go to White Street, because I don't know if you ever went to the gay memorial on White Street. No.
But, lots of people go to Key West to die from AIDS. The AIDS Memorial on White Street Pier has got the name of everyone that's ever died in Key West engraved, beautifully engraved. And there's all sorts of sayings and slogans and things properly engraved. There's no graffiti. It's beautifully maintained, and it's a very, very special place to go, no matter what your sexual proclivity. It's a very, very special place to go, and you get this feeling of how that particular group of people have suffered through no fault of their own. Yeah. Basically, and it's and just up from that, there's another graveyard of some African slaves that died on a boat there, and I don't know if you know this, and I didn't find out until quite recently. But when they started, a lot of those slaves that they got there when they landed in Key West, they were repatriated to Africa, and that's where the country of Liberia comes from.
Is that right?
Yeah, Liberia, Libera. Freedom. And Liberia was a country set up by America to release slaves into.
Well, there you go. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot to it for something that's not particularly historical, old, if you know what I mean. I mean, America.
No, it's not old at all.
Yeah, America's not that old, is it?
You could only get there by boat until about 1920.
Yeah, so
the train started going there, the Flagler Railroad, and that got blown away in the 1937 Great Storm. And that was it then. It was cut off again. You can only go as far as Key Largo. Once you get to Key Largo, that's it. There were no bridges, only the railway bridges. Yeah.
Yeah. And now the others, I'm not too familiar. I know you fish Isla Morada a lot.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the different islands? Key Largo, is that a decent venue as well?
Yeah, Key Largo's okay. There's some good fishing up there. I've never fished much around Key Largo. You've got John Pennycamp Park, State Park there. It's closer to the Everglades by road, so you can go to Flamingo and fish from there, and Everglades City, and go out and redfish, snook, and more tarpon and sharks, that territory.
Yeah.
Isla Morada is very different because you're one side's the ocean, the other side's Florida Bay, whereas in Key West, one side's the ocean, the other side's the Gulf of Mexico. And Florida Bay is part of the Gulf of Mexico, but the average depth of Florida Bay is 4 foot.
4 foot, yeah, that's why you're going to, you want your permits and...
Yeah, there's deeper channels, and there's all sorts of things you catch there. Lots of you can sight fish for virtually everything.
What I always found, I mean, we didn't go on one, but I know you fished them. Is those skiffs, the way that those captains manage those skiffs is unreal.
Yeah. 17 foot flat bottom boat with a 350 horsepower outboard on the back.
In 4 foot.
Overtake cars going down US 1.
Yes, but it's just great. And Isla Morada's, I'm thinking, there's a lot of fishing off of the road there, yeah?
Oh, yeah, by the roadside. I'll tell you, if you've got Netflix, have a look at Bloodline.
I am making a note. Bloodline.
Bloodline is a story about the Rayburn family, which is a fictitious family, a fictitious story, all filmed in Islamorada.
Ah, okay.
And most of the places are public places. They just change the names for the purposes of the programme. So, I watched that. Oh, there's the Raw Bar. Not the Raw Bar. There's the Dead Animal Bar. It's the Safari Lounge. Everybody knows it's Dead Animal Bar. Sure. Oh, there's Woody's. Woody's is a gentleman's club.
Okay. Yeah.
Got Woody's. There's a Bass Pro Shop there as well, Worldwide Sportsman, which is a very small Bass Pro shop. It's a very big shop. In fact, I've still got probably, I don't know, several pairs of trousers, shirts and stuff I've bought from there. Oh, the clothing is as good as the tackle.
Speaking of angling attire, probably one of the funniest things I remember, which I might jog your memory a little bit when we went, was that I went to buy a shirt because I was only wearing T-shirts. Not good when you're on a boat.
Oh, I remember.
Do you remember where I'm going?
I remember.
So I went to the local shop, got myself what I thought was this fantastic, free-flowing, quick-drying sports shirt.
It was.
You
weren't tonight. It was a ladies' one.
There you go. Yeah. Until somebody said the buttons are on the wrong side. I'm sure I got stitched up with that one. That was brilliant. No, brilliant. It really is a magical place, and as I say,
it is.
I'd anybody recommend to go. The fishing's brilliant, but if you can't afford the fishing because it's, as you say, it ain't cheap anymore, then you've got lots and lots of other things to do in between. Brilliant.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Good.
Great stuff.
So we have covered an awful lot there then, Keith. We've covered the Pope swim, which is what I wanted to discuss.
Yeah.
We've covered
Mickey Fagg jumping in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, brilliant.
Me losing a national.
Yeah.
Me not winning a match in Ireland.
Yes. But having some good weights, that's unreal.
Oh, yeah.
The Trent, Florida, that's exactly what I wanted to cover off. Brilliant. So once again, a massive thank you for your time.
You're welcome, mate.
Just before we wrap up, any plans for the rest of the year? What are you going to be up to?
Difficult really to make plans, isn't it? I mean, I hope to be fishing Tide Fest again, which sold out very quickly.
Yeah.
That's, I think, second Sunday in September. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Provided we've got no whales or more seals or anything like that coming up the river. I don't fancy even a small minke whale is more than will go in my landing net. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Match fishing really I can't do now.
Any fluff chucking?
Well, given time, mate. Yeah, given time. I'd love to have a day at Rutland. I love Rutland and Graffham. I prefer Rutland. Lovely day at Diva Springs. That'd be looking forward to that. See my old friend Pete Cockwell, who sort of works there part time now, and Stuart, the manager. Lots of old friends. I'm desperate to renew acquaintances with.
Yeah,
it's just trying to sort out the situation that I've got here before I can do any of it. Because when you gets to a stage, mate, and now you're a family man.
Yeah. Get
to a stage when there's priorities.
Yeah, 100%. And looking
up until I was virtually 70, my priority was getting my ass on the riverbank fishing.
Yeah,
and up until I was probably 60. And once I got to that, my priority was broadcasting. Mm-hmm. I loved it so much, and never mind getting paid for it. I mean, what a joy to get paid for doing stuff like that, and paid regally well.
What's the old saying? Do a job you love, you never work a day in your life.
That's right. Yeah. And Tight Lines wasn't a job.
No.
I never told Barry Earn that. I wanted him to keep fighting to give me more money.
Yeah, that's right.
I would have, if they'd have said to me, "Look, Keith, we've had to pay this much for the football and that much for F1. We can't afford Tight Lines anymore unless, we don't have to pay for it." I'd have done it for nothing. I'd have given me a year for nothing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your time, Keith. We'll speak soon then, buddy.
I look forward to it.
For all your fishing needs, be sure to check out Fishing Evolution. Boasting 2 floors of branded displays, visit our recently expanded superstore at Hadley Road in Sleaford, where we offer a huge range of tackle from all of the leading coarse and carp brands, such as Nash, Fox, Corda, Drennan, Preston, Guru, Daiwa, and many, many more. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where we share all of the latest news and updates about products available in store.
Welcome to the Tackle Shed, where for the uninitiated, this is where I look through the magazines once again, or anything online that's caught my eye with a view to upcoming tackle. Similarly, anything that I've used and abused, tried and tested on the bank that I think might enhance your own fishing, of course, I'll spread the love as well. So straight in with the magazines. This month's May edition of Match Fishing, A Meeting of Minds, page 80. And it's advertised in the new Guru Special Edition RSW seat box. Now, I guess there's a lot. It's worth it. The reason why I mention this is because of this is the one where a shipping container or a transporter carrying these from Europe into the UK was either hijacked or robbed. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but a load of these went missing. Now, I saw a very, very dodgy one pop up on eBay. Whether it was one of these missing ones, I'm not too sure. But Guru, of course, have put in place this registration piece so they can register the real deal, if you like, and try and iron out where these missing boxes have gone. And it's pretty crazy, really. But what it does demonstrate, and I think it's keen for us all to think about, is that tackle, of course, is very, very valuable. And these criminals know that now. You know, they're cottoned onto it. And for an RRP of 1,499 quid. Reeves aren't cheap anyway, but this is probably the most expensive they've come up with. For a big old container of those that have gone missing, that's worth big bucks. So, you know, it's all about thinking about where you keep your tackle. You know, make sure that you've got insurance, etc., etc. And because these scroats, they're onto it now, that is for sure. But the box in general, the pie looks absolutely superb, to be quite honest. There's some nice new features on there, especially around the catches, the draw dividers. It looks more robust than some of the previous Reeves. I've never had a Reeve, but you know, I know guys that have had them for years and years, and this is a really nice piece of kit. I would never invest that sort of money on a seat box, to be quite honest, but I can see those that do and why they do it. And yeah, I just thought I'd highlight that because it was definitely that box that, I say, a number of them went missing. So yes, make sure that you keep your gear safe, guys and girls. Moving through, Match Winner Pole, the new range from Daiwa. I've already covered this off on a previous podcast. Pretty much before it came to market, there's a lot of print being spent on this range of poles. They're saying it's probably the best range they've ever come up with that's below the UK made ones. You get a lot bang for your buck, if you like, especially with the MW5, which is the flagship model. You can find that for around $1,500 now. And yeah, so there's a lot of that in the press. But in terms of tried and tested, on page 85, you've got the New Fish Aqualog net bags. And I changed my luggage recently to the New Fish stuff. In terms of the net bag, it's probably the best I've had. I go through net bags like mad. I drove over one and burst one once. I had a Preston one, which was really good, but I ripped that and I had a disaster. But this one, really good. It fits 4. So what did I fish with at weekend? I had 3 2.5 meters. And I had 1 3 meter in there as well, because I needed 4 nets for the venue I was going to. Comfortably fit in there, as well as my landing net. There's a side tray pocket as well. It's made out of tough EVA. And for the sake of, I think I paid about 40 quid for it, something like that. Really, really nice piece of kit. But now what they look like, they're doing 2 versions, just a net bag or a net and tray bag. So there's 2 choices. So from a tried and tested perspective, I've had them for a fair few months now. And I would recommend that, is for sure. So that was that. Moving on to a new set of reels released from Colmick. Now, these are called Skydek, SKYDEK, coming in at a sort of £97 for a 4,000 size and £99.99, 100 quid for the 5,000 side. There's a little competition to win the set here as well in the magazine. But the reason why I mention is they look the part, they look really smart, but I've never used Colmick gear. I know it's popular. Lad, I know Matt York, up from the other side of Lincolnshire there, he's been sponsored by Colmick and he raves about the stuff, and I don't think it's because he's got that sponsorship. I think he genuinely believes in it. Friend of mine as well, Scott Johnson over at Saw Tackle in Kegworth in Leicestershire. He stocks Colmick. His team from the tackle shop, sponsored by Colmick Boland as well, the ground bait manufacturer. And again, big fan of the kit. So, there's lots of people I'm hearing good reports off of, but I've never actually tried anything. But what I would say, it's a nice review. It gets, good ratings here, looks the part. So could be something to look at if you're interested in getting what I would say is a feeder reel. That is for sure. Moving on then to some bargains that were, let's get my notes, highlighted in the weekly press. So we've got Frenzy. So there's a 10 tube hold all, the old Frenzy style, bit of a bargain, totalfishingtackle.com, $29.99, down from $53.99. That's a 10 tube hold all, looks the part. And Frenzy is an interesting one. And what caught my eye and to discuss this was Frenzy has been off the radar for quite some time, really. There's a couple of their sponsored anglers still doing very, very well. But in terms of tackle releases in the press, in the tackle shops, you don't see a lot of Frenzy anymore. I do believe they've been bought out, and I believe that they are going to go for a big, big relaunch. I know that Adam Richards is one of those that have joined this new Frenzy stable, ready for a big relaunch. So it'd be really interesting to see what items of tackle that they'll be releasing in the future. Another bargain that I spotted was a Matrix power pole. 11 meters, looks the part for short range fishing down the edge, top 2 plus 2, etc. Again, tackle.co.uk. It should be £419. It's down to £299. So good old saving of that. Looks the business. And something that's running throughout a lot of the press as well is the relaunch of Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare holds so many memories for me because when I began fishing, it was using a little bit of kit that my brother had squirreled away in my dad's shed. Dad didn't fish, didn't really have anybody to take me, but my brother had a couple of dabbles when he was younger. It was just sat there in the shed, and I sort of picked that up and took it out. And the main rod was a 10-foot black and white job Shakespeare rod. And he hated me using it, but he wasn't doing, so I sort of adopted it and caught my first fish on that rod and then used it through time. And then, of course, everybody had the old blue iconic Shakespeare boxes, etc. And it was just one of those big, big names that, synonymous for those in my era, my age, as a kid growing up. Shakespeare was huge. And it's great to say Shakespeare have been, part of Pure Fishing, which is an American company, for some time now. And it looks like what they've done is they've taken their time to relaunch the Shakespeare Super Team brand. What happened, of course, is Shakespeare Super Team, they had a match team, which then became Cadence, Bait Tech Cadence team, because, of course, Shakespeare weren't really releasing products that were for a match fishing audience, if you like. So it made sense that they parted waves, and Shakespeare had been sat there now looking like they're designing and relaunching this new Super Team range, and there's a lot going on there. Method feeder rods have had great reviews. There's an 11, 12, 13 foot Super Team Waggler rods that have been launched, all between sort of 50 and £70. So not real budget, but that sort of middle of the range, affordable, if you like, as well as the kits that Shakespeare are releasing as well for new starters. And I've said this before, when I see these starter kits in supermarkets, your Aldi's, your Lidl's, etc., the buying team really, ill-educated. The stuff in these kits is terrible. And what you need is a tackle manufacturer to create a range of affordable products that are usable. It's all been done before. Preston come out with some kits. Maver, the reality series, they did a few as well. But this Shakespeare set looks in the right price range. Again, 40, 50, 60 quid, depending on what you're getting. And they look the part to get people up and running, just like I did all those years ago. Similarly, whilst we're on the theme of getting people into fishing, I really like the look of this new range that's called Phase 1 by Coram. And it's a nice name as well, actually. I really like that. So Phase 1 of your fishing career, if you like, or your hobby. And this range, once again, complete affordability with a nice little fixed spool reel at £8. Very usable by the look of it, 10-foot Waggler rod for sort of £20. Then there's landing nets, tenner. And basically what you want to do is kit yourself out for sort of 50, 60 quid, give the sport a go, and with kit that's usable, that's going to work, and then it's going to drive those anglers to try again and, get them hooked for a lifetime of fishing. And it's so important that these tackle companies address that early stages of an angler's career. And that's why, I always talk about improve your course fishing in the press pack, because it's aimed not just at, new starters, but everyone really, and it's developing. So let's get the anglers in, learning to fish, and then developing them with those types of magazines. Then, of course, hopefully they'll be coming to match anglers or specimen anglers, etc., and take it up for a lifetime. So a couple of really, really interesting new launches, if you like, aimed at the first time angler. Finishing then with a tried and tested piece from myself. Big shout out to Ian Everett. We first come across Ian's floats.co.uk from episode 1 of series 1 when Keith Arthur said that he'd had some floats sent to him for the charity Get Hooked on Fishing. There's some slight seconds, and now all the kids have been using these floats, catching fish, etc. So once I'd done that podcast, I jumped onto Ian's site and had a little look around, and I bought a few floats to give them a try and a couple of, name checks of the range. So the F1K8 Shallers, they've started to come into play now with the warmer weather. Robust, well-built, highly visible, just perfect for fishing, shallow, slapping, pellet, maggot, whatever, for F1s. Brilliant. But my favourite are called the Chimpingers. So they're based loosely, I guess, they're very similar to a chimp, float, like the old KC floats, and you get them in a glass stem, get them in a wire stem, and again, just strong styrofoam bodies, really visible tips. You can see the way that he puts the eye into the body as well, and like a lot of, there's tons of handmade floats out there, isn't there? But with this, I think it's a general labour of love when Ian's making these floats. So I've got to give a name check for those because they're fantastic. But also, other than that, he does what's called a zero bore hybrid elastic. And I've been using the orange, which is a 10 to 12. It's had a bit of an offer on there as well, actually 25% off his hybrid. So if that's still going, then definitely, get yourself involved. But that hybrid, that 10 to 12, I always veered away from them. I tried the Matrix one, the Slick, a couple of years ago. I just couldn't get on with it. I actually found that it stuck in my pole quite a lot. So I sort of dismissed hybrid for quite some time. And then when Preston launched theirs last year, I really got onto it, especially in the lighter ones, the 5, 7 and 9, really liked it over the autumn and winter time. But I thought bigger ones, those stronger versions, I'm not too sure. So I gave Ian's a go, the 10 to 12, the orange. And for fish between £1 and £5, so far, it's been superb. You strike and it's nice and soft, strong enough to set the hook, but it's just soft enough to draw the fish out of the swim before it then powers up. The last thing you want to do is strike and that fish goes nuts and then scares the rest of the shoal, and they take ages to settle back down. But with this hybrid, this zero bore, it seems to be, just right to get the fish out. So yeah, I've only used the 10 to 12 so far, but I will be ordering more. So that is for sure. So that's my tried and tested piece. And that's a little bit from the Tackle Shed. Okay, that's it. That is episode 1 of series 2 wrapped up. A big thank you for listening. A big thanks to Keith Arthur for his time. In terms of upcoming guests, that is a big TBC. Everybody's really busy now. And of course, with restrictions lifting and the river season opening soon, people are getting out on the bank more. But we have got some great guests lined up. We've got the likes of Dean Barlow, we've got Dave Harrell, and we've got former world champion Clive Branson to talk to as well. So thanks for listening and tight lines. Thank you.